So we had a really, I would say, a really good conference last period with the other group of students. Near the end, we sort of ran a little bit short with time, which I kind of always expect because some questions seem to take up more time than others. Also, this time it's a little bit quieter in the library, which is nice because again we had a bit of an issue hearing each other in the other period. So we're going to begin by first just generally reflecting on research-informed actions on the RIA project. So what we would like you to do is, let's not worry about the questions right away, okay? Because questions might, they're very guided. So what I would like to ask you is, just generally, what are some of the things that stood out for you in the last two projects? If you had to tell your friends, your parents, guardians, other family members about what you have done, then what would be those things that stood out for you, just in general? Get up, to start us off, without any kind of guidance from these questions.
Can I add?
Sure, please.
Yeah. Also think of it as if you were to say tell somebody in grade 9, how to do this, somebody younger than you, what kinds of things would you give them? What tips would you give them? Yeah. So think of it that way as well.
It always takes
lots of ideas.
Yeah. Once the ice gets broken, trust me, we get rolling on the conversations. So think a little bit. So anything that's kind of stood out for you, things you would say to somebody in grade 9, how to do these projects. Okay, thank you, Manur.
No problem. If I were to teach a class or whatever, I would probably tell them to research, or I'd probably teach them about the issues and the controversy over them. So how or why this is such a big issue, and because that way they'll be motivated to actually go and finish the project or something. And what stood what stood up for me was the climate change unit, because I just saw so much suffering that was happening, the water consumption thing, and how so many animals were dying.
So the suffering you're speaking of, where did you get that from? What was it? Was there something in class that was said, shown, or something you maybe learned on your own about, particularly about the issue of water consumption?
Well, yeah, I think most of it was what I researched, because there's I researched about the water project, and they had this whole video on how all of these people were starving, and that made me feel so much more closer. Not starving, I mean, we're thirsty, and that made me feel closer to the issue because I could actually see what's happening.
Good. You developed a little bit of almost like an emotional attachment to the issue, right? Sounds like that brought you a bit closer to the issue, and hopefully, maybe in your case, motivated you to learn more about it, perhaps even to act on that issue. Thank you for starting us off. Anything else that stood out? I mean, in these projects, something that was interesting, challenging, new. Okay, thank you, great.
I felt the actions taken by people were really creative. That's what stood out to me the most, is that the innovative thinking that the classroom can have as a mentality.
Oh, yeah. Did anybody else feel kind of sane?
Sure. Sorry, what kinds of things stood out as really creative?
For me, it's to count cars and go make interesting posters. Posters not that creative, but the contents of it got really cool looking. It wasn't traditional anymore. It was they actually shaped it to be a water droplet.
Yeah.
Oh, it's really cool looking. And the shampoo bottle over there, I found that really creative too. With the little analogy of the Trojan horse, I found that really cool and creative as well.
Right on, yeah. And that was, that we were just looking at that shampoo bottle as you guys were walking out. And that was developed by by Sarah, right? Emily, and Sabrina. Thank you. Oh.
There's two of us in this class.
Yes, I know. Sabrina Johnson and Sabrina Martinelli. There you go. Okay. And that was a really creative idea, how you guys had all these positive things on the outside, but the moment you open it, there's only a little negative. And that's what you're kind of referring to, the level of creativity. Anything else that stood out as a really creative action? Yes?
Some people use the fun theory
Yeah.
and make students get involved in fun activities that were good for the environment.
And what was the fun theory for just some of us that may have not watched the fun theory or learned about it? Do you recall what that was?
Like a specific video.
Or general, yeah, specific video or something general. What does fun theory mean?
They found out that people were more likely to get involved in issues if they can enjoy doing things that would help with the issue.
Yeah, if you make something more fun, the idea is you do it more. Yes, absolutely.
Sorry,
Yeah.
what was an example? What did some of the students do?
For recycling, I think some of them hosted a game for like they would get prizes if they could choose recyclable items
Oh.
in the bin.
Mm. Jeremy, you had your
I
hand.
was just gonna add on to this on this, but Sherry said it. So.
Oh, she already said it. Okay. I thought, Riley, you have.
No, sir.
No. Okay. Okay. So anything else before we get into the questions that kind of stood out? I want to mention also. I mean, speaking of creativity, I was really impressed with the videos that some of you created. In fact, Manur, if I can just use it as an example, stayed afterwards and told me, she said, you know, I really want to learn how to make videos. Right? And I've got an interest too in creating in a bit of filmmaking, documentary style as well. And it's just such a neat way to tell a story, right, through video, and I think it's catchy, and it seems to be this, I don't know, quote unquote 21st century thing right now, where videos are big. So, video that stands out. Sarah, you developed some really nice video, you and your group, Nadia as well. Yeah, so that was really nice. And a few others, of course. I don't want to just mention you two, but there were definitely other interesting creative projects. Anything else about RIA that stood out, that's worth mentioning? Things you might want to say to the, yes?
Some students actually contacted corporations, and although some did not get responses, it was a creative way.
Absolutely. Who was that actually, was it this class that they contacted 3 different shampoo companies? Oh no, it might have been the other class. But yeah, that was interesting. They contacted, and then one of the companies responded back. And the group contacted the 3 companies, again, I don't remember what they were, L'Oreal, Garnier, something else, around animal testing to find out if their company, after learning that the companies test products on animals, they wanted to find out if their companies were doing the same thing. So one company replied with this long letter saying, you know, they pride themselves in spending millions of dollars to test their product in other ways, and they're definitely not testing it on animals. And I thought that was neat that the company actually responded back to the students' email request. So certainly a very creative action that they took. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is, if there's no other comments to be made, general comments about research-informed activism and the kind of learning, we can get into some specific questions now, okay? So, if you have reflection pages with you, okay, so there are essentially three parts to this reflection, 3 components. We have issues, we have research, and then we have actions. Right? Let's try to listen, please. Thank you. Okay. The first question is, to what extent did you feel like you had control over what STSE issues to explore? And again, like our last class, I reminded the students that, you know, this is the first time you're sitting in a community circle. Let's conduct ourselves appropriately. There are certain few norms and rules. One is to listen with eyes, ears, well, ears primarily, then eyes and your hearts. Respectful listening, right? Somebody's talking, you're listening, and if you have something to say, you know, just try to put your hand up. That way we're not speaking over each other. Okay, so to what extent did you feel like you had control over issues that you actually explored? Claire.
I think there's kind of like a bias in what we explored because we only really looked at the negative parts of most products, like to see what people don't see, but we never really focus on the positives. Like there still is really good things about shampoo and stuff, that's why we use it, but we just look at the negative things.
Right. So in terms of looking at the, you know, controlling.
Why is that? Why is it sort of biased towards the negative?
I guess 'cause that's kind of what we were like told to focus on, like what people don't see, and no one focuses on the negative, but we still didn't like mention the positive at all.
In terms of the control over the issues that you were exploring, so thinking back to climate change unit and thinking back to the last RIA in chemistry, with the personal care products, how did you rate yourself in terms of the extent to which you had control over what issue particularly to explore? Yes.
I rated 4 because I rated 4 because for the climate change unit we got to like choose from like a range of issues like electricity to like to like food, transportation, and then so it had like kind of like a range, and then in chemistry like that was like a lot more control, like we got a lot more control because we got to choose our own product and like what issue related to that product. So I thought we had a lot of control, but like I didn't rate it a 5 because it's not like we had total control.
Exactly, yeah. Sabrina.
I rated it 4 because, well, on the climate change, like Palmer said, we had a variety from transportation and foods. Like those are a lot different from each other. But then for the chemistry one, we only had to focus between personal hygiene products instead of other products that we use on a daily basis instead.
Such as, for
Which is
example?
like, well, example, like lead and pencils or stuff like what we use on a daily basis, like pens. If we were to get like ink on our hands, there are like studies that go around that say that can cause like skin cancer or something around like that.
Interesting. So even if you, in other words, if you broaden, we broadened our scope, not just looking at personal care products. Somebody asked me why did we do personal care products. I think it may have been you, Ray, that asked that question. And I tried to justify why we chose personal care products. Ali and myself thought that would be most relevant to you guys, given that teenagers, and not just teenagers, but young adults and adults alike, care about maybe our appearance, and it would be something that you would really relate to easily, right, as students. Okay, so as we kind of get into the next research-informed action project in biology, you will have a lot more control over. First of all, there'll be a much bigger range of topics to look at. So you will have a lot more control in terms of choosing what you want to look at. Hopefully, you choose something that interests you. Right? That's the idea. That if you choose something that interests you, then you will be more motivated to hopefully learn about it, but learn about, again, like I think Claire, you pointed out, both sides, right? Both the pros perhaps and the cons, and then maybe make your own, take your own stand on that. How confident were you, or are you, that you understood the controversy involved in the issues you studied? So again, it goes back to what Claire mentioned about the positives being left out and focusing on negatives. What is an issue? Somebody asks you, hey, what's an issue? What would you tell them an issue is? Yes?
Something that can be debated over and has two different sides to it. So, yes.
Yeah, something that can be debated, something that has both sides, right? That's what an issue is. Anything else that you can add to that? Yes, it's Emma.
Usually an issue has consequences that go along with it for either side.
Yes. Can you maybe just a little bit elaborate on that, what you mean by consequences?
Consequences, well, like if there's two very different sides, if one side was chosen, then the issue would be over, but there would be consequences taken because of that. So if it was like shampoo and they were testing on animals, some people are against it, some people aren't. So if they continue testing on animals, then there's the consequence that animals are still getting harmed. But then there's also less money being used to test them.
Right. Interesting. So, thinking about how our confidence level, your confidence level, in how well you understood the controversy in your specific issues. What did you rate yourself? And I'm going to ask, it's a fair game now because I asked you to complete this for homework, right? So you can ask anybody to respond to this. So how confident were you, Mohammed? I'll ask you, if that's okay. And I'll ask you and your group, Fardeen and Usama. How confident were you, boys, that you understood controversy involved in the issue or issues you studied, both climate change and most recently the personal care products?
I was confident. I rated 5.
Okay.
Because the issue was pretty obvious. Because we were researching the health effects of our products and how they're manufactured and the chemicals used, effects they can have on our health and the environment. So I think the issue was pretty obvious.
So you, 3 of you, I don't know if you all feel the same, and you don't necessarily have to feel the same about this. But you, Mohammed, you felt really confident. You understood the controversy, that there were 2 sides.
Yeah.
Could you maybe just give us an example of the other side? So in the person, what was the personal care product?
A lot of people argue that the chemicals such as, like, for example, oxybenzone used in sunscreen is actually they should use it because of its effectiveness, and a lot of other people argue that it's too harmful and it's not worth using. So there's basically clear 2 sides of the argument.
It's a good example with one particular compound there that you cited, oxybenzone, that there are groups that believe that it has certain merit and effectiveness in the product, which is why they probably put it in there. But on the other hand, there's groups that also oppose the use of oxybenzone for other reasons, which are not positive reasons. Let's focus on another one. Let's take another one. Yes, Manur.
I rated it 5 as well. And the reason why I felt like I understood the controversy so much is because, like, I use products, like I use shampoo, I use these lotions, I know how good they are, and I know, like, all the claims that they make, they're right in front of the bottle, and I know how it smells, I know all the good things about it because I use them. And I know the other part of the controversy because, like, when I researched them, and some of the consequences like cancer, I feel like almost, like, at least I know someone who's had someone die from cancer, and I felt like I've seen the effects of it, like, all over.
Now, were these effects as a result of these care products, or was it something else?
Well, like, a lot of these products, like, have cancerous chemicals.
How confident are we, and I don't know, I don't want to get into this, I'm kind of crossing over to some of the questions here, but how confident are we in that some of these same chemicals are responsible for some of the things you just say? Or is this something that's, may potentially be a cause, right?
Yeah, it may potentially be a cause.
Yeah. Okay, clearly we're hearing that issues are controversial, and that it's important to, as we get into the next research-informed action project, that we consider both sides of the issue, right? That we look at, what are some of the positives? For example, one of the topics that you'll be looking at, that you potentially might consider, is ultrasound. I mean, this is a method by which we can study soft tissue. It's also, look at potential diagnosis of certain illness, but also the most common method by which pregnant women, right, when they go for testing, see if the fetus is growing and the condition. Right, it's the only, I think, method right now available, from what I know, right, as far as looking at.
I have to do my research.
Right, and yeah, I'm thinking, is there anything else? But there have been studies, for example, that ultrasound can damage soft tissue, that there are risks associated with ultrasound. So it's up to you then, as a student, to say, okay, do I understand the controversy in this particular, related to the ultrasound procedure? And if so, I mean, where do I stand on it? And if you feel that, you know what, the research, there's some negatives, maybe then you need to act on some of those potentially negative impacts of ultrasound on the well-being of individuals and overall of societies. Not to mention also, I don't know what happens when the technology itself stops functioning. Where does it go? Is it, you know, is it harming the environment in any way or whatnot? The next question here is a question that relates, and I'm going to read the question first. Then I'm going to give you a little bit about background about the question, just to, and we have an example of the back of that. So what do you believe to be some of the main components of a network that together provide a dominant and maybe overly positive story about the product or services or product or service you investigate? So this question relates to the mind map that we developed about your personal care product, personal hygiene product. And in the mind map, as you will recall, you had different, and we have one example in the back. This is Sarah's group. Right, Zara had developed with her group an interesting mind map around, what was the personal care product? Lotion, right? And in that mind map, all of you identified different components, both living and not living, and how they interact. And then you coded these, you color-coded them. And you color-coded components of a network, or networks, that function together, that align themselves in such a way that they support, in this case, the brand image of one particular story, and often they make it overly positive. So what are some of those components? Right? What do you believe are some of those components of a network that together function to support a particular narrative here, or a story about the product you investigate? I hope that was clear. Maybe it's a tough one, but I think it's also the way I'm asking maybe the question is because I do feel like you'll be able to pick this question apart. Who promotes? Let me make it very clear. Who promotes the use of lotion? Give me one component. And again, you did the stakeholder network map. I asked you to list different stakeholders. We call them the stakeholder networks, and then we looked at issues. Just to kind of recall your memory here. Peyton, you had your hand up. Nadia, you had your hand up. And Zara, you had your hand up. So can we start with Peyton?
Media and corporations and companies that promote the product or, the product. Relate to the issue that we did this last week, the issue. They promote the product and say it's this, and they label it, and with all these positive words, get people to buy it, get consumers to buy it, so it's like an ongoing circle.
Right. I'm going to just paraphrase a little bit louder. Try to, I know, again, some of us have softer voices. What Peyton is saying, what I'm hearing is that it's the media, corporations, companies, they're part of a network that often use, again, you said that they use certain words, right, to promote their brand image. Does that make sense? Now, you
I wonder if I could use my, I was thinking of mentioning this in the last session, but it's the idea that an orchestra is playing a tune or music, a song or whatever, and there's a trumpet section, trombone section, violin section, all the different sections of an orchestra, but they're all playing the same piece of music. So that's not like the same message, but everyone has their part. So I guess that's, I don't know if you see that's the analogy there. So with any one of the products that you have, what are the various sort of parts of the orchestra, if you like, all the members that are contributing to the same tune? I don't know if that analogy works for you. But anyway.
That makes sense. So, and I think we touched upon some of those already, right?
Yeah.
So let's just kind of carry on with that along that same vein there. You had your hand up next, yes.
Yeah, corporations have advertisers who like promote their brand image through like advertisements, like commercials, like ads, and they promote like their brand image through colors, like promotions to others, and it attracts consumers to buy their products.
So we're hearing now that there's different, these components of a network. Seems like they're both living in the case that, you know, there's people, advertisers, and, you know, people work in the company, but there's also the things like commercials, right, and ads. So there's all other parts, things that these living parts, components develop, which then represent certain things, right? Promote that a certain product is maybe cool or appealing in some ways. Zara, you're
I would say governments too, because their main goal is to please corporations, so they're likely to support the distribution of goods.
right, yeah.
That's a pretty strong claim. I mean, that's interesting. Not challenging it, except to say that, you know, a lot of people would say, well, isn't the government there to support all the people? But you're saying its main job is to support the corporations. Is that really what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did you get that idea?
Well, the story of stuff, and also when I watch news.
Oh.
Yeah, the stories.
Do other people have comments on that? But that's a very strong and important claim to say that the government really is just mainly out to support corporations and not the rest of us.
Well, government support the corporation for the people, if you think about it, because the corporation hire jobs, and that's what the general public wants.
So that's part of the network.
They want the economy to be better. That's what the people want.
Yeah. And that's an interesting connection, because what you're saying is governments support corporations, but governments have interest because corporations also hire people, and if we don't want people to be out of the job, because that's not going to stimulate our economy if we have a high unemployment. So there is a nice connection there.
Are there other comments about that? That's like you say that as a professor, I think hearing high school students state something like that is pretty impressive. So I'd like to hear some more ideas from you on it. Other ideas?
I have a different idea. Like, I think consumers play a big role as well, because when, like, for example, like a smartphone, like everyone has a smartphone, and you go and buy a smartphone, or everyone uses Bath and Body Works, and then says like, oh, let's go into Bath and Body Works because that's the only lotion that you really know, or like, or like a certain shampoo, or like if a certain celebrity uses it, oh, let's go and get that. So I think that sometimes we promote like the brand, like when you wear a certain brand on your shirt, like you promote it.
Interesting, because what you're saying is also exactly what we heard in the other group, and the comment I made was exactly that. There's this whole cliques, groups formed around particular brands. If you're not having this, you're not part of the group. Oh, well, sorry, you don't have iPhones. You got your, you got the old phone still. You're not in, right? So there's this. So consumers certainly are an important part of that network. Also, component of that network that can, in many ways, support those dominant messages, right? Because we buy into this. And in Leonard called that the golden era of consumption, right? We're very much part of that cycle. So yes, I agree with you entirely that certain things we wear, certain things, the brand labels, we're also promoting them. I think that's what the companies want us, right? They want us to stick their labels so that we can go out in public and promote their products. Okay. Anything else about the reflecting on issues, those three questions that anyone would like to add? All right. So let's move on to research. Now, it's really important that if we're going to take actions, if you're going to, as I like to say, change the world, right? Start changing the world. I mean, you're young right now, but I do believe, and I shared this last class, and I shared this with you as well, that young people, that you are the future. And one of the greatest things about my job, my profession, and Dr. Beth's profession as well, is that we really have, I believe we have an important role to play in shaping societies. in shaping the future, and making sure that the citizens of tomorrow, future citizens, become more active citizens. Those citizens that will act on issues and not sit passively and let things happen to them. Right. So, but at the same time, you know, citizens need to be informed. And I give an example of, you know, last week being in San Francisco, and I brought footage back to you from the protest in front of the Hilton Hotel. And the protest was, you know, by a group of educators who did not want the U.S. Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, to attend the conference because of the controversy surrounding some of the school reforms in the U.S. Now, somebody asked me in class, he goes, why didn't you become part of this? Why didn't you go and protest yourself? Well, I said, you know, I stood on the sidelines and I was learning. I didn't feel like I could take part in a protest when I wasn't informed about the reform policies. You know, it would be, I would just be adding to the masses, but I would not be an educated participant. I would not be an informed participant. And how silly would it be if media came up to me and interviewed me? And that's what was happening. There were groups around, there were people interviewing the protesters. And I was one of those people who were interviewing them. And they certainly knew very much about the school reform and why they were protesting Arne Duncan's visit. I didn't, so I did not engage. I was a participant in learning. So research is really important to inform us primarily so that we can then act on an issue. So,
did you show the dihydrogen monoxide video?
No, I haven't.
No.
You sure right now?
Huh?
What?
Sure right now.
You know?
Oh, no,
Yeah.
you should show it right now.
Oh, we can't show it now. I don't know, can.
Oh, no, not right now. But I certainly can share that.
It'd be one thing you may want to see.
Is that right? It's hydrogen monoxide. That's the one about the being poisoned.
Dihydrogen monoxide.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the research here. We want to begin by looking at primary studies that you conducted, that you designed yourself. How confident are you in designing a valid, and note the word valid is in bold letters. So how confident are you in designing a valid study? And in your answer, if you can maybe shed some light on the word valid and what we mean by a valid study. So we all had some projects now. These projects you learn how to do correlational studies, and there's no volunteers. I'll just ask a few blind people as a group to answer. Okay, thank you for
Valid
starting.
as in unbiased would be kind of hard to actually carry out because we only have a certain sample size. We can't really conduct a study on the whole school. So it would be hard to actually conclude that teenagers heading here until secondary school.
Right. Sounds like you mentioned the word bias, right? So what makes that study biased again, or
I would say the sample size.
sample size? So when we think about the next project, I guess we want to be conscious about sample size, right? So what would you consider to be, I don't know, a good sample size so that your study becomes a valid study? We want to talk about sample size. Peyton.
Getting a survey out to 100 people.
So about 100 people would be better.
50.
Sure. I mean, would more than would even more be better? No.
It would be more better, but I think if we get to 200 people or like 300, like they can, but it's gonna be hard to get on with that.
Yeah, it's time consuming and analyzing a lot of data. So how do these scientists, how do these researchers, these people who conduct studies that are, you know, that involve thousands of people, right?
Because sometimes they actually pay them in like stuff to come to do the tests and that kind of stuff.
So paying somebody, you're right,
Yeah.
can get people, but what I was asking is the scientists still have to collate the data. They still have to get the data together and examine perhaps 10,000 people and I don't know 10-item question or sometimes even more. So there's still laborious task.
What about using your Facebook friends or something. Is that your idea?
No, well, like Ray did that.
Sorry?
Ray made a
I can,
Facebook study.
I can make some comments about that.
Yeah.
You know how Facebook has been subjected to many, many hacking, spamming,
Yeah.
and surveys like that usually kind of get overlooked at times just because they think it's that link that'll get your account hacked. A lot of people are skeptical these days. So right now, the best way to do it would probably be actually going ahead and messaging each person individually and asking them to take their time.
Yeah.
But then again, that's been done too. So you got to find people that actually trust you. And this way, I guess, for me.
Well, maybe doing it in a couple of different ways and,
Yeah.
and seeing if they compare results.
So instead of just using Facebook, you have to go through a lot of different methods just to get the promised result.
Yeah. Oh, Chelsea.
You would also have to find people that are interested, because like not many people in the school would want to take the time out of their day to do a survey that was about something that they're not interested in. So you have to get a pool of people who are interested in the thing that you study into.
Point. These are all really good points, guys. And Maddie.
I think also we focused on surveying people of our age, but like shampoo affects everyone, right? And that's just one example. And I think like we were focused on just school. What about people in different parts of Ontario, different parts of Canada? Like it still affects everyone. We just focused on what's around us.
How would you go about, that's a really great point by the way, how would we go about, I guess, when you're speaking to broadening our studies, right?
I guess like if we had more time, we could contact bigger like foundations that are more interested in it to ask for their help for it.
So
If we had more time.
You're tapping into some other networks, sounds like, right? To try to get, to help you gather some data. No, that's really good. Again, all of you kind of touched upon somewhat of mixed methods as well in research, which is a natural strategy in research. It's a methodology, a mixed methodology, to really to make our study more valid. When we conduct studies too, when we do work, research, you have to be able to gather multiple sources of data. And it's like going to a court, right? You know, you have to have multiple witnesses testifying, so the evidence has to corroborate the same law, right? In order for you to, I don't know, convict somebody of something, right? You can't just base everything off of one witness, let's say. Say, oh, okay, this is what this witness says, and therefore you're guilty or not guilty. You have to have multiple witnesses. In the same way, you gotta have multiple sources of data, right? And what your point about getting students who are interested is also a really good one, because if you're not getting somebody who's interested, chances are they're not going to give you very accurate results either, right? So, and then that becomes I don't want to say a useless piece of data, right? Somebody made a point last for class that they were just circling things. Nobody was really reading the survey. Did anybody have that experience here, where you gave out a survey and the data was like you watched the students complete it and they just kind of didn't even read it or just completed it because? I will give it to Mariam. Please.
Well, so most of our surveys were done at lunchtime.
Yeah.
So that's a time when people want to take a break from all the classes, the coursework. So I saw a lot of people who were just, like you said, didn't even read the questions. They were just circling random things. And as a consequence of that, when I analyzed my data, there were a lot of illegitimate guesses that I had to not use and keep inside, and that affected my sample size and
Interesting what you just said, because you also recognized that those were illegitimate answers, and therefore you did not include them. That's really good, right? Knowing that, especially if you know that, right? If you observe that, and if you can see somebody was, I don't know, goofing off on the survey. Nadia. I always confuse the two twins here. Did you have your hand? One of you had your hand up? Or? Oh, you? Okay.
With my survey, I had both qualitative and quantitative data. So with the quantitative answers, I think I did well with that. I think they answered truthfully. But for the qualitative answers, some people answered I don't know or didn't really matter or something, and I had to hunt them down to be more specific.
Hunt them down. Yeah. Hunting for data, right? It's called data mining, right? The term mining for data, right? It's yeah, that's a good one. I like that. Yeah. sometimes, we do have to do that is to hunt for data. Anybody else about this question about validity? Yes, Jeremy.
Some people also didn't take the survey as seriously as others, so their answers may have been
Skewed a bit, right?
yeah. Well, not really skewed, like trying to be funny more than actually trying to answer questions.
And did you count those surveys there, for example? So I want to just, move on to the next question, but just to conclude this one here, I think as we get into our next RIA project, the last one, which I will, by the way, give you tomorrow and go over right with you, I want you to think about how do we, the purpose of this session here is reflecting. And we learn by reflecting. And I say all extraordinary people are great people are reflecting, very reflective individuals. Okay? And professional athletes, always reflecting how well they're doing so they can improve their skills. The same thing. We want to improve our skill in conducting RIA. That's why we're doing this. Right? But as we move to the next project, think about how to gather your data, right, from whether it be surveys or even interviews, right? There's different ways of gathering data so that your results are valid and so that you also have more confidence in the kind of results that you are sharing and interpretations that you're making from those results. Which is brings me to the next question: is how much confidence do you have in the results of your studies? So think back to your climate change study and most recently to your chemistry RIA project regarding personal care products. How confident were you in those results? And we'll briefly maybe have two people comment on that before moving to the next question. Okay, Sabrina.
I felt very confident in our results because, well, our survey didn't really have like an option for I don't know anything. They asked what product they use, like what shampoo brand they use, why they use that one, and if they were aware of chemicals. So there's typically only a few answers they can choose from because, well, obviously they can't say they don't know what kind of shampoo brand they use because they use it every morning. And then there must be a reason why they consistently buy that shampoo brand. And then the chemical question is a yes or no question, so it wasn't.
So you rated yourself pretty high on that, right? Did you give yourself a 5 on that, or?
A 4. Because
4?
some people said, well, I don't know why I buy that shampoo. Like one person probably said, I don't know why.
But overall, you're pretty, you're 80% confident in your results. Emily.
To add on to what Sabrina said for our survey, also, a lot of people put the answer like, why they buy that shampoo just because my parents buy it. So it's not really like a legitimate answer. Like that is a reason on why they use it, but there's no further information there. It's just kind of because their parents buy it. Well, why did their parents buy it? We don't know.
Thank you for sharing.
With some of the survey, I think we're just off the target market, considering like a lot of us teenagers don't really purchase personal hygiene products. We usually just use our parents' purchases.
Right.
Target market might be better off.
Right, that's a good point. Now, a question I have around this is, could you have, after learning something about different personal hygiene products, to what extent do you feel like you can have some control over what your parents buy? And be the, act on their choices. Right? Saying something like, hey, mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, aunt, uncle, whoever it is that you live with, maybe we want to buy this particular product because so and so. Yeah?
Well, like personally, if I switch from one brand of shampoo to another, my hair gets really it's really dry because it has to adapt to it. I don't know what goes on, but my hair just gets really gross after you switch brands. So I've told my parents just to consistently buy the same brand so that doesn't happen.
That's interesting, eh? Does anybody have that? I mean, I don't know. I don't know about that. So, yeah. Yeah, same. Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like one brand of shampoo, if you stick to it, it's the one that if you that your hair gets used to.
Everything works like well, but then when you switch from brands, it takes a while. Everything turns out the same in the end, but it takes a while for it to like absorb.
That's really weird.
I don't know if that's I don't wanna be like, is this maybe is there a gender thing here as well coming into play? Or no, because oh, I have hair, I don't see why. Maybe it's a longer hair, you notice things more in longer hair than shorter hair, perhaps? Maybe I'm a bit ignorant to this because I don't notice any difference if I switch from one to the next, but I'm just learning this. This is an interesting phenomenon here for me. It's true, yeah? How many of you kind of felt that if you switched? I'm just, this is again my curiosity here. Put your hand up if you felt like you switch or something changes about your hair. Yeah, wow, yeah, interesting. Mainly girls again with longer hair.
Then I have a question. Would that be like a placebo effect? Or like you're just because you switch a brand, you're thinking about it more often? And you're like more aware of it?
But if you physically notice it, like what the ladies are saying, you physically notice it.
Like, my hair gets really dry. It's not even funny.
I'm just saying for some people it could be just them thinking it and then the placebo effect.
Well, yeah, you're probably using the placebo effect of it, but yeah.
With the study.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, okay, Emily.
Well, yeah, like, I usually use Tresemme shampoo, but sometimes my mom, if it's on sale, she'll buy like Herbal Essence or something, and like the 2 days after I switch, my hair, it just like, it feels differently because I guess my hair is like, there are different, even though the bases of shampoos are all the same, there are different chemicals in different brands of shampoos, so I think your hair needs to like adapt to those different chemicals that are being put in.
No, it makes sense to me. That part is, I mean, it only speaks to the things that are put inside, right, to make certain products be effective and perhaps maybe more desirable, and that may be, just may be, one of those things that corporations use to get us hooked on a particular product. It's interesting. I don't know. I mean, I'm just sort of brainstorming in here with you. Yeah.
So like, I think there was like this girl on YouTube, and she was saying that if you use like anti-dandruff shampoos, it's supposed to make your hair longer because they like moisturize or they have more oils that like are good for your scalp, and since your scalp is like good, then your hair grows longer. And I've seen that because I used it, and then like people ask like, why is your hair so long? How long has it been since you cut it? I'm like,
Yeah. So I understand this thing on YouTube is promoting a particular product that is an anti-dandruff, which will actually improve the quality of your scalp, which will make your hair grow longer.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Claire.
There was this big thing, like, I think it's still kind of going on, but it was more so last summer that if you use horse shampoo, it's like a certain brand, then it'll make your hair grow longer. And I'm not kidding. So I saw an ad for it in a magazine, and I was like, I didn't actually think it was real, so I looked it up. And then apparently horse owners use like their shampoo because their horse's hair looks so nice or something. And then they turned it into like a human version, and I bought it because like it was for humans. Like they had it in the actual shampoo aisle. It didn't, like I didn't think it worked any different, but like it kind of worked, I guess. I think it was more just me thinking it.
Really?
But yeah.
Okay.
It's called mane and tail.
Called what?
Mane and tail. And they come in like these giant bottles for horses. But like it's in magazines and everything.
I learned something. Yeah, this is an interesting session here. Okay, well, there's something to try, right? Great.
Well, that's pretty interesting considering hair growth.
Just 1 second.
Hair growth based on health conditions, like evolution suggests why our hair grows so long is because it shows that we're healthy individuals and it'll attract potential mates easier just due to the physical appeal of hair.
Really interesting. You know, all of you are, again, I want to try to direct us back to the questions here, but what I'm hearing is a lot of interesting stuff here. And of course, you're getting your information from somewhere, right? Whether it be real life experience, whether it be YouTube video, whether it will be from horse farmers, okay, and magazines. But it brings me to the next question, which is, excuse me, thank you. Brings me to the next question, which is, how confident are you about the findings from secondary research, which is basically, for most of us, was the internet-based research. So how confident are we, or how, are you, for you, in the kind of information that you were learning in climate change and last RIA project, chemistry unit, from the internet. Big.
My reading was free, about the constitution unit, and some of the facts that was on the internet, like, were probably outdated. Like, they probably said it was found with, like, 10 million people use this many water bottles each day. Like, it's not like, recent information.
Right, so the importance of the reading most recent is important to you, right? And that would that build your confidence if you in the research if it was published I don't know, last year compared to it being published 7 years ago? Yep.
It's like kind of ironic because things you find on the internet should be the most recent. Because like World Wide Web and everything's constantly updated.
Right, yeah. At the same time, we do have research on it that's you know, you can look into the historical records, quote unquote historical, 7 years ago is I guess things do kind of change. We seem to be living in a world that is kind of fast-paced and it is an information economy, information age. So we do get, you're right, a lot of stuff updated really, really quickly, especially now with the, you know, with smartphones and these mobile devices at our fingertips as well. But what are some of the things and what are some of the sites that you would access that you can trust?
They have like a lot of websites where they have like discussions based on the products that if you get more information based. It's not just like corporation based information, like it's people telling you what they've experienced firsthand. So you like have more of an idea of what the experience was like, so you can put that towards like.
Absolutely. And would you trust that?
Well, I do trust it based on like their experiences because they've experienced it. So like for example, my product was like hair bleach, and though like the corporations are saying that it's like good for you and the products that they use don't affect you, people have their hair falling out